Hello and welcome to the next talk in the 2021 series of the Open UK Future Leaders training sessions. Please note this meeting is being recorded so it can be made available soon afterwards on our YouTube channel. First, a little about the Open UK Future Leaders Group. The Future Leaders Group is a collection of individuals who are interested in open technologies, including open source software, open hardware and open data. It includes a wide range of people that work in technology, intellectual property, outsourcing, procurement, data, coding and innovation, as well as private practice lawyers and in-house counsel that work in the technology sector and related fields. It operates under the direction of the Open UK Legal and Policy Committee and has a clear purpose to bring together and develop future leaders in legal policy matters relating to open technologies and to support and further the mission of the Legal and Policy Committee. The Future Leaders Group is currently co-chaired by me, Robert Grinnell from Phil Fisher, and Katie Gibson from Bristow's, and we're both lawyers advising on technology and commercial matters. The group is always open to new ideas and to new members, whether getting involved in all of our activities or just dipping in and out of our various projects, so please do get in contact if you'd like to get involved. And for today's session, we're pleased to be joined by Cheryl Hung, who is VP of Ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, who are part of the Linux Foundation. And Cheryl leads the Cloud Native Computing Foundation's End User Community. The CNCF has over 140 members, including several global instantly recognizable names, and is the largest end-user community of any open source foundation or standards body. The CNCF is also home to over 50 of the fastest growing open source infrastructure projects, including Kubernetes, Prometheus and Envoy. Cheryl is a regular keynote speaker and founded the Cloud Native London meetup with over 6,000 members. She previously built back-end features for Google Maps as a C++ engineer and holds a master's in computer science from the University of Cambridge, King's College. We'll have a chance for any questions at the end, so please do pop them in the chat and we'll invite you onto voice and video to ask them yourself if you'd like to later on. And without any further ado, Cheryl, welcome to our session today and thanks for joining us. And over to you to talk about cloud native and platform issues.
Thank you so much, Rob, and it is fantastic to be here. I'd like to thank all of Open UK for welcoming me and hosting me at today's talk. I'm going to now share my screen. And the area that I work in is cloud native. And since we are still in January, I thought it would be fun and maybe a little unwise to come up with some predictions that I'm thinking about in terms of this year and share them with you. Rob has already given me a pretty thorough introduction, but just to reiterate once again, I'm the VP of Ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Previously, I've been an engineer at Google. I've been building software and building infrastructure for about 10 years now. I'm very involved with the open source community, and I've also founded the Cloud Native London meetup group, which is one of the largest kind of meetups in this space. So let me give you a little bit of context around cloud native, and then maybe a little bit of insight into the technology and why it's become a success. So this is a group of search. This is the Google search trends for a group of different technologies within the cloud infrastructure space. So Kubernetes, OpenStack, Hadoop, and serverless. And you can see that over the last 5 years or so, OpenStack and Hadoop have both slowly declined, while Kubernetes has really shot up. It's really grown to outstrip all of those by quite some way. This actually tracks somewhat with my own timeline. I left Google the end of 2015 around here. And at that time, Kubernetes was barely a thing. Very few people knew about containers or Kubernetes at all. But containers is in fact the approach that Google has been using to build infrastructure internally for nearly 20 years at this point. So within Google, it's not a new technology at all. What was new about it is that they open sourced a version of what is internally called Borg and became known as Kubernetes. And it's really the secret sauce of how Google has managed to grow, how it's managed to scale up and up and up and up consistently for 20, 25 years. So about this time, I realized, hey, I kind of know what this containers and Kubernetes thing is already because I've been doing it as an engineer. And I moved my own career into the infrastructure and operations space. Around the middle of 2017, I founded the Cloud Native London Meetup group to kind of share what I was seeing with other people and to encourage other people to share what they were seeing. And then around end of 2018, I joined CNCF officially so that I could work full-time in open source and bring that to an even broader audience. A little bit of background about CNCF. It's a non-profit underneath the Linux Foundation. And actually the number that Rob gave is probably a little bit out of date. I think we were over 70 projects now. So it was originally founded with Kubernetes as the very first project. Google donated Kubernetes as an open source project and founded CNCF around it with some other partners to be a home, not just for Kubernetes, but for a lot of other projects around system administration and operations. And we have kind of 3 tiers of projects now. Graduated are the most mature projects. They're widely adopted and widely used. We have incubating projects that have seen some usage and some success. And then we have even more sandbox projects. And sandbox projects are those that are more experimental and up and coming. And as you can see from all of the logos, these cover a really, really wide range of topics, storage and networking, metrics, tooling, chaos engineering. And we found that this trend is just going up and up and up. So in the first year of CNCF, we accepted 4 projects, including Kubernetes. Last year, we accepted 35, and that's 35 new projects. So we expect this trend to continue, and we expect the number of projects and the amount of open source innovation to continue growing. Of course, all of these projects actually come down to people. These are developers, but not just developers, technical writers, marketers, community people who've contributed towards the success of each of these open source projects. And to date, we've had 113,000 contributors who've contributed on GitHub to these projects. And contributing here, as I said, is not just about code. It's also about people raising issues or commenting or committing parts of pull requests to GitHub. And collectively, that's come up to 5.4 million contributions. This graph shows you the location of each of these contributors. So you can see it's really a worldwide effort. The US is the biggest one, has the most contributors, but UK, Germany, France also has a really large number of people who contribute. And interestingly, we found just at towards the end of 2020, that China overtook Germany to become the second greatest, the country with the second biggest number of contributors. And we really see this as a success. We see this as it's not just the US, or it's not even just the US and Europe contributing towards this. This is really a global, worldwide effort. And that diversity of people and the easy access is one of the major factors towards the success of this movement. And lastly, we also host the largest open source conference in the world, KubeCon, or KubeCon plus Cloud Native Con. I thought I'd throw in some pictures from the days when we could actually get together and see people face to face. This was the keynote stage where I presented to, I believe, 12,000 people sitting in one room. And this was the sponsor hall where we had hundreds of companies sponsoring. Would love to get back to that one day, but as with everything else, our next KubeCon Cloud Native Con is virtual and it's coming up in May. But I just wanted to show you this to get a little bit of the feeling of the vibe of the community around it. It's a really, really vibrant community and people just really love being part of it. And that is not the end of it because the ecosystem is accelerating. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the business and the impact and the opportunities around the projects. So stepping away from the developer side and towards the ecosystem. COVID-19 has accelerated all trends for better or for worse, whether that's working from home or online shopping. And within cloud usage, generally it's increased the pace of cloud adoption. So in this report, you can see that 57% of the respondents said that they plan to increase the amount of usage of cloud that they use due to the pandemic. And when you have people interested in using something, you'll find companies and products catering towards that. And this is the CNCF Landscape. Those 70 or so projects are just the open source projects within CNCF, whereas this also includes all of the closed source projects as well. So everything in gray here. Actually, the large ones are CNCF projects, and then the small white ones are open source projects, but not CNCF, and then gray is not open source projects. And most people's reaction when they see this is, wow, this is a bit overwhelming. But to tell you the truth, it is a little bit overwhelming because this is kind of the state of the ecosystem at the moment. There's many, many different products out there, and they're all catering and trying to solve different problems within this space. If you want to take a closer look at this, by the way, you can go to l.cncf.io, which is an interactive version, so you can actually click in and read a bit more about each of these. CNCF itself is a non-profit, and it's primarily funded through membership. These are companies that pay to be members of the foundation. And we're extremely pleased that all of the large cloud providers and large tech companies have become members of CNCF. And this kind of collaboration is what fosters all of the innovation around it. And I do particularly want to point out as well that there are a lot of Chinese companies listed here. You can see Huawei and Alibaba Cloud. I think Baidu, Tencent are all here as well. Just to reiterate that geographically, this is a worldwide movement. In fact, Volcano Engine is the commercial arm of ByteDance, which is the company behind TikTok. So we are really seeing a worldwide movement. It's not just the Google Cloud and AWS and Microsoft Azure, the kind of big name companies you might already know. In fact, a lot of different companies and a lot of different industries are behind this movement. And this just is to show you some of the companies that have been acquired in this space. Most of these were previously CNCF members, or they've been acquired by CNCF members. And some of these include some of the largest tech acquisitions ever. For example, Red Hat being acquired by IBM for $34 billion. Pivotal was acquired by VMware for $2.7 billion. GitHub being acquired by Microsoft for $7.5 billion. And this is just to show you the scale and the value that's being created within these ecosystems. That's, of course, also great for the engineers and the technical people among you. Kubernetes has grown in terms of the number of jobs that are available for it by over 2,000% in the last 4 years. And according to the Linux Foundation's open source job reports, 69% of hiring managers are looking for cloud and container expertise. CNCF itself has a jobs board, which you can visit at jobs.cncf.io. We've had more than 1,000 jobs posted there. Tens of thousands of people apply through these. So if you are someone who's got some interest within this, then check it out. And I think this is my last point around the ecosystem. The training and the certification has played a big part in the growth of this, because it shows people that they have the skills to actually use all of these technologies. So we've had over 164,000 people register for these courses. And we also have 3 certifications, which are aimed at administrators, developers, and security people. These are the CKA, CKAD, and CKS, respectively. In fact, we just launched the CKS in November 2020. This is the latest in the series. And these are incredibly popular. They're very difficult. They're hands-on technical exercises that you have to run through and challenges that you have to solve. So these are really good kind of way to prove that people have these skills. Okay, so having told you all of that, what is all the fuss? Why has this become so big? So as Rob mentioned, I work with the CNCF End User Community, where we have more than 145 companies who are adopting cloud native technologies. And these are some of the biggest names in the world. You can see here Apple, Mastercard, you can see Walmart, Verizon. We've got just a ton of different companies who are all actively using these technologies in production today to serve their users and serve their customers. And this is obviously only a small sampling because there are probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of companies that are using cloud native without being part of this. But I thought the best way to kind of tell you what's all the fuss is to hear from these companies and these organizations themselves. So I picked out a couple of videos that CNCF did with some of our members here, and I would just like to show them to you, and so you can hear from the horse's mouth, as it were, why they use cloud native. First one I have is Adidas.
So Kubernetes was for us a platform built by engineers for engineers. So it's really relieving the teams from really the heavy lifting task from the infrastructure, but at the same time giving them the visibility of what is behind the YAML files.
The main pain point that we were addressing was the developer experience before. So with our old process on VM based, it took developers to get a machine. It took them sometimes days or weeks. That feels like being an artist with the hands tied on the back, right? Paint a picture like that. That's impossible.
Kubernetes brings to us the possibility of being much faster in the way how we build the applications. So for example, in our e-com shop, we came from delivery cycles from 4 to 6 weeks, and now we are delivering features 4 or 5 times a day.
We guessed we will have a few people joining and it will be slowly adopted, but it was more field of dreams. So we built it and everyone came and wants to use it. And now we are overwhelmed by the demand of people joining the platform.
The usage for us of cloud native technologies has grown exponentially in the last year and a half since we really launched globally the platform. So we have right now more than 4,000 pods running in Kubernetes.
On number one, focus on day 2. Choosing a technology is easy. Installing and configuring it is also something that almost everyone can do. But then operating it at scale is something that is very, very, very hard. Number 2, what I would really tell anyone is don't underestimate the efforts of training.
Everyone that is able to touch a line of code at Adidas, not only our internal engineers, also some of our partners, they come to Zaragoza to our delivery, to our IT hub, and they spend a full week with us delivering an application end-to-end. We also teach our teams to spend at least 50% of their time sitting with the delivery teams, so they really feel the pain and they are really able to direct the platforms to where the teams need that. The last advice that I will give is apply your company culture to everything that you do. For example, we are really a sports company in our DNA and we love competition. We don't like top-down mandate. We launch our DevOps Cup. So for example, where more than 220 people, engineers, are competing to be the best DevOps team.
Okay, so that was Adidas, obviously, and their major pain point was around not being able to move fast enough. And for a company the size of Adidas, this is actually quite a big problem because you need to be able to be very responsive. So for example, they were only releasing every 4 to 6 weeks, and they went from 4 to 6 weeks to 3 to 4 times a day. And that means you can make a lot of experiments, which means you can serve your customers better, and then ultimately sort of sustain the business. Okay, so this was the first one of three. The second one is Pinterest, which I think you probably also heard of.
Pinterest is the world's first visual discovery engine. Our mission is to help users discover and do things they love. Today on our platform, we have over 250 million monthly active users, and we are serving over 10 billion recommendations every single day. So the scale of infrastructure at Pinterest is pretty enormous. We have tens of thousands of servers, we have 300 petabytes of data, and we have thousands of jobs and workflows that all power the Pinterest experience.
Pinterest has been on the cloud since day one, and it became clear that as the company grew, it was important for us to reduce the overhead of managing virtual machines. Thus, we invested on Kubernetes as the compute infrastructure so we can enable engineers to move fast and remove that overhead of managing machines by themselves.
We are able to take ideas from ideation to production in a matter of minutes, whereas earlier it would take us hours or days.
We spent over 6 weeks evaluating multiple different technologies, including Kubernetes, Apache Mesos, Docker Swarm, and even just virtual machines. The process involved from all the way evaluating how networking works, to scheduling, to operations, and also community support. We found that Kubernetes definitely aced each one of those areas for us to make a clear decision to move forward with Kubernetes.
Our motivation of joining CNCF was largely because of the community that it gives us access to. We are strong believers in open source software and want to engage and leverage the community to scale the systems that we are using.
Machine learning is a critical use case for Pinterest. It's what powers our visual discovery engine. It was extremely important for us to provide engineers a quick and an easy way to build their models, iterate on their models, scale and deploy, and end up serving to the end customers. Kubernetes provided a clean abstraction for us to build and iterate on this use case. As infrastructure operators, we rarely tend to focus on the user experience. Kubernetes definitely provides a clean abstraction for us to build a great platform without exposing any of those intricate operational details.
Okay, fantastic. So the challenge that Pinterest face is one of scale. Something that you might want to do by hand if you run 5 or 10 or something is impossible to do by hand if you have 100,000 of them. So what they really needed was a lot of automation so that they could scale the amount of people they could serve, the amount of users of Pinterest, without having to scale the number of individuals, the individual employees working on that infrastructure to support it. And I do really like this quote from the product manager at Pinterest saying they are in this position to run things at scale and to test things out in a way that a lot of people might not be able to do. And because of that, they want to contribute back towards open source and contribute what they know to make this better for everybody. Okay. Last story. This is a company called ThreadUp, and ThreadUp do consignment and fashion.
ThreadUp's the largest online consignment store for women's and children's clothes. We process over 2 million items every month across all our distribution centers in the US, and we use technology at the center of everything we do to get that done. When we founded ThreadUp 9 years ago, we were early on Amazon Web Services for our backend. And for the most part, those were handcrafted servers. We configured them just to get them out as fast as we could, but there was no standardization. And as we kept growing, that became a bigger and bigger chore to manage. Moving towards cloud-native technologies like Kubernetes really unlocks our ability to experiment quickly and learn from customers along the way. It's really important to a company like us who's disrupting the retail industry to make sure that as we're building software and getting it out in front of our users, we can do it on a fast cycle and learn a ton as we experiment. one of the main motivators in moving us towards this new type of infrastructure was to really make sure that our engineers could embrace the DevOps mindset as they built software. It was really important to us that they could own the lifecycle from end to end, from conception at design through shipping it and running it in production. ThreadUp's a fast-growing company, so one of the things that was really important to us as we moved to Kubernetes is to enable auto-scaling in a seamless and easily manageable way. On days like Black Friday, we no longer have to sit there adding instances, monitoring the traffic, doing a lot of manual work. It's automated and it's handled for us from the system. One of the great things that Cloud Native Technologies has brought to our engineering team is unlocking their ability to write software and get it live in front of customers, delivering our value to them faster without having to worry about the nuts and bolts of what's going on under the hood. Our future is all about automation, and behind that, Cloud Native Technologies are going to unlock our ability to embrace that and go full force towards the future.
All good stuff. Let's go back to presentation mode. Let me just try and bring this up. Yeah. So what we learned from ThreadUp is that their challenge is being able to scale faster and faster. So for days like Black Friday, they're going to have a lot more demand than they would usually see. And so they can't scale that by just throwing more and more servers at the problem. They actually have to scale it using automation and observability and these best practices around cloud native. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of a flavor. I hope that you enjoyed hearing from the people who are actually using these technologies. And to just sum up why organizations actually use cloud native, there's 4 major benefits. By far the most valuable of these, most widely used one is the higher development velocity, the ability to innovate faster and faster, so that instead of releasing something once every few months, you're releasing stuff multiple times per day. And that means that you can make small changes, you can roll back quickly in case there's something that goes wrong. And then as you improve faster and faster, that means that you can keep up with your competitors within the market. The second one is resiliency and availability. We are talking about physical machines at the end of the day. They are going to fail no matter what happens. There will always be failures of your infrastructure. But just as ThreadUp needed to always make sure they were serving customers on Black Friday, they could not have their infrastructure go down on the 1 or 2 days of the year where they would have the potential to make the most money. So being able to scale and being able to be highly available is the next major benefit of cloud native. The third benefit of this is better resource efficiency. Once you have a machine deciding how to schedule your work and how to use your infrastructure better, you can have it optimize that. So it wasn't shown in the video, but I believe that Pinterest cut its cloud spending by 40 to 50% by moving to cloud native, just because you could pack it much more tightly and therefore you could make much better use of the infrastructure that you already have. And then this one, also not mentioned in the video, but is a definitely up and coming thing that I talk to a lot of people about, is multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. The multi-cloud means instead of putting all your eggs in one basket with, say, AWS, instead you want the ability to spread your risk across multiple vendors. So you might want to use Google Cloud for some things and Microsoft Azure for other things, and then AWS for something else. And that lowers your risk in case that one vendor goes down or it decides to stop providing the services that you need. Hybrid cloud is about having your own data centers and then the public cloud on top of that. And there are multiple reasons why you might want to do this. One is, let's take ThreadUp again as an example, that they have huge demands on the few days around Black Friday, but they don't want to maintain and pay for that infrastructure for the rest of the year. So they'll have their data centers and then what's called bursting into the public cloud. So just for those few days, they will shift a bunch of work into the public cloud. Another reason that you might want to have this hybrid model is that you need access to certain kinds of infrastructure or services that you can't build in-house. So for example, Pinterest said that they use a lot of machine learning. Machine learning powers their search. And so you might want to train machine learning models on very specific hardware that you can only access through the public cloud. You don't have the money or the need to buy all of that infrastructure yourself and keep it for yourself. So then you want this hybrid model where you split part of your work for the stuff you can maintain yourself and then access just the services you need from the public cloud. Okay, time to get into the 10 predictions for cloud native in 2021. These are in no particular order. Some of them are more technical, some of them are more around the ecosystem. Some of them require you to have a little bit more knowledge about how cloud native works, but I hope that people can listen to hear different things and pick up something of interest to them. And caveats before I go into these. This is Cassandra of Greek mythology fame, the prophet who was, always told the truth but was never believed. I'm going to flip this slightly and say, if this is all true, then that's great. And I definitely predicted the future. If none of these come to play out, then clearly I was just talking riddles and so on. So caveat, of course, these are predictions and in some sense unwise predictions, but I hope that you can help you see the future and see the trends that I'm seeing from sitting inside the CNCF and talking to the developers and talking to the end users of cloud native. The first trend is Kubernetes for the edge. The vast majority of what we've talked about so far has been a centralized cloud model. This means that AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure will manage all of the cloud infrastructure for you and you will run everything there. But this has higher latency. So let's take your mobile phone. Your mobile phone actually has a lot of processing power that it could be using, and that if you could make better use of it, would make your applications faster and snappier. So there's a push now kind of in this direction where instead of doing everything in the cloud, we are pushing things towards the edge. In other words, how much processing can we do on your mobile phone so that it has a better user experience for you instead of always having to wait for it to go up to the cloud and then come back down again. So there's a few projects in this area, one called Cube Edge, which is trying to enable this kind of model. Second prediction is around service mesh. So this graph is from Monzo, sort of London-based bank. They use Kubernetes and containers for pretty much everything that they do. And this graph shows the different services that they run. This is thousands of services. And then each line between these is a service that talks to another service. So it's a kind of network connection between between services. And this is very, very complicated. There's so many failure points here, right? And a service mesh is basically trying to take this very unreliable network and pretend that you have a perfectly reliable network on top of it. The internet is kind of another example in the same principle. You take millions of devices connected to the internet and pretend that they all have perfect connections to each other and no internet ever goes down. We have quite a few different projects in the Kubernetes space that are trying to tackle this problem. And in the last few years, there's been a bit of jostling around who is going to, quote unquote, be the winner or be the one that the community standardizes around. And I think this year it will probably shift towards one or the other of these projects. This is a problem that almost everybody faces as they scale bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is an area that I think is not yet settled, but I think it will be. Two kind of new-ish up-and-coming technologies. One is WebAssembly or WASM, and the other is eBPF. So both of these technologies are kind of sandboxed abstractions for code for developers, and Kubernetes is kind of moving. There's a couple of different projects in this area that will be moving to that you can run Kubernetes using these mechanisms. Better developer and operator experiences. This is a dashboard which was released by Spotify. It's called Backstage, and it's just a nicer way for companies to be able to manage and see and get better visibility into their infrastructure. So for example, you can see what the cloud cost is, what security issues there are, how many instances you've had. And pretty much every company in the world needs to be able to build something like this because they need insight into their infrastructure. And the important thing about this is it's pluggable. That different companies can use the same open source project and they can plug in the things they care about and customize it and then remove the things that they don't care about. And Spotify, of course, is music streaming. They're never going to release this as a commercial tool. So for them, releasing something like this to open source just makes sense. Okay, chaos engineering. Chaos engineering, the most famous example of this is from Netflix, what they call Chaos Monkey. Chaos engineering is much like a vaccine. It's injecting a little bit of harm so that overall you become more resilient. You figure out where the failures are and you become more resilient. With Netflix, they came up with this Chaos Monkey thing where every once in a while it would just go around the infrastructure and kind of cause havoc, like a monkey just like ripping servers out of their infrastructure, out of their racks. And then they would find out what problems this really caused and fix those problems before they ran into them in production. And of course, Netflix is one of the most stable and widely used services now. So for cloud native, you might have, for example, a couple of services where sometimes you say 50% of my requests just fail. What happens to the service? Can it recover from that? Or maybe you say 50% of my requests include a 10-second delay. So if I'm expecting an instant response and I'm not getting one, then am I able to recover from that? And this has been around in the cloud space for a little while with a few companies like Netflix, but I think this will spread more widely because the only way to figure out if your infrastructure is resilient is to actually try it in practice, in production. The rise of Finnops or financial operations. So you can see in this report from 2020 that companies were asked what are their top cloud initiatives, and the number one was to optimize how they are using and how much they're spending on cloud. And I think 5 or 6 down here is also better financial reporting. And this is a topic that has come up a lot in the last 6 months. Companies want to be able to better understand how they're spending on cloud, and then how they can optimize for that. And the Finnops Foundation is a sister foundation to CNCF. It is also underneath the Linux Foundation. And the goal is to build best practices and more tools around this space. So I expect this to come up a lot within the next year. Rust is a programming language that has been around for a little while and has taken off a little bit over the last few years. This is a survey from RedMonk, the consulting company, where they plot the popularity of different programming languages according to the number of projects on GitHub and on Stack Overflow. And Rust is kind of over here, but 5 years ago, Rust was something probably more down around here. So Rust has overtaken a lot of these other a lot of these other programming languages within the last few years. And within the CNCF community, or within Cloud Native, the most popular programming language is Go by a significant amount. Kubernetes is written in Go. Most of the other major projects are also written in Go. But Rust is up and coming, and I think we start to see more and more new projects that are being built in Rust. GitOps. GitOps is another best practice around how to manage infrastructure. And the key around GitOps is that everything you do should be auditable, and you should be able to roll back to it quickly if you need to. So instead of having an individual engineer like typing commands on a laptop to fix things, you describe your entire system as a specification, and you update that specification within Git, version control system. And that way you always have this trail of what your infrastructure looks like at any particular point. And you rely on Kubernetes to just read the specification and actually make it happen in real life. And that means that you always know the state of what you're running, and it means you can always roll back if you have a problem because you have that audit trail. If you're interested in this, there is a new working group around GitOps, which has just been launched, I think, at the end of 2020. Crosscloud. I mentioned this a little bit before, this idea of cloud, hybrid cloud, and multi-cloud. This has always been a sort of, field of dreams for cloud native. In other words, it doesn't matter where you actually run it, you just have to run it somewhere and it will just work exactly the same wherever you go. This is a much harder problem than it seems. And there's a lot of demand for it. So I think there are some best practices around this, but not as many kind of real successful large deployments that run either hybrid or multi-cloud at the moment. But since there are very good reasons why you might want to do this, I think this will be a multi-year effort, but I think this year is when things are starting to get a little bit more real. I believe this is the last of my 10 predictions. And the last prediction is around end user driven open source. As you saw before, Spotify are not at all in the infrastructure space. So companies like Spotify, who are end users, are donating their work back to the open source community because it's not secret for them. There's no one's going to buy a Spotify subscription off the basis of a developer portal that its engineers use. And we've launched this report called the CNCF End User Technology Radar to show what end users really think and what projects they really use, and hopefully drive open source by the people who are actually using this and actually running it day to day. So do check this out. This comes out once a quarter on different topics. So that was a very, very fast run through, covered a lot of different topics. Here is a summary of everything that I just talked about. Kubernetes will move towards the edge to enable things like your mobile phone to run applications, and that will give you better user experience. Service mesh consolidation will reduce the number of projects that try and pretend that a unreliable network becomes a reliable network. WebAssembly and eBPF will become hotter. They'll take off, and there'll be projects that are using these to hook into either web browsers or the Linux kernel. The internal experience for developers and operators will get better as these open source projects allow companies to customize how they use dashboards. There'll be more chaos engineering practices, more sort of vaccine, inject harm so that you improve your overall resiliency. Finnops will become another best practice, being more, having better visibility into your financial spending and how to optimize for that. The Rust programming language, which has already been up and coming, will grow, so there are more projects, new projects that are started in Rust. GitOps, which allows for audit trails and the ability to roll back easily, will also become a best practice. We'll see more success stories in running cross-cloud, hybrid cloud, or multi-cloud. And finally, end users are becoming contributors and becoming more engaged with the open source community directly instead of relying on vendors as they might have done in the past. If you want to learn more about this, then please come along to the meetup that I run, Cloud Native London. We run on the first Wednesday of each month, and we use this little app called Rambly to hang out in. But we also live stream to YouTube and to Twitch. And in there, I have 3 speakers each month who come in and share some of the challenges they're facing or explain different parts of the cloud native ecosystem. And that is all from me. I hope that you enjoyed this. These slides will be up on my blog by the end of today. That's oycheryl.com. And once again, I'd like to say thank you to Amanda and the rest of the Open UK team for hosting me and hosting this talk today. With that, I'm going to hand back to you, Rob.
Great, thank you so much, Cheryl. I think we've got some time to open the floor to some questions. So if anyone's got a question, please feel free to jump in.
Can I ask a question?
Yep, go for it.
So I have an advantage, which is that Cheryl and I both live in London and I get to walk around parks with her picking her brain. But if you had to pick the single most important thing coming up in the year ahead for all of us, thinking about CNCF and thinking about being in the UK, what's the single most important thing that's going to happen this year? Not to put you on the spot or anything like that. Well, you're being Mystic Meg, you see, you walked into that one.
This is why I said unwise predictions. I'm Cassandra. I make predictions and they may or may not be believed. Strangely enough, we actually have a very strong cloud native presence within London and within the UK. So several of the most influential people within the community are based in the UK. And several of the predictions that I just showed you are actually come from people within the UK as well. So for example, Liz Rice, who is the current chair of the Technical Oversight Committee, contributed some of those, came up with some of those predictions originally. And GitOps is the brainchild of Alexis Richardson from Weaveworks, who is also was a previous chair and is once again sort of driving forward the state of all of this infrastructure. I would say that the biggest and most influential thing that's going to happen this year. I'll tell you. Okay, I'll tell you something that I'm personally I think is underserved, but I think will come to a head a little bit this year. The one that I guess I'm most personally interested in right now is that rise of Finnops, or financial operations, because the companies, as I said, like the pandemic has accelerated all kinds of trends, for better or for worse. And while that's accelerated the amount of cloud that people are using, it's also accelerated the amount of spend that they're using. And there are actually excellent reasons why, or you might argue that the cloud providers don't want you to understand exactly how much you're spending, right? Or how much you can optimize for. And I think this area is a little bit underserved right now, but it comes up. I hear it all the time in conversations. So I think that something will probably end up coming out this year around FinOps.
Okay. Any other questions?
So while you're looking for your other questions, I'm going to say to Cheryl, I think that's a dead cert. So that's probably a really good prediction to have made. And I'm hoping we'll have James McLeod from Finnops come and speak to us sometime soon. You may remember, Cheryl, that the Finnops guys sponsored a FinTech award, and we're hoping to have another one of those at the awards this year. And it's really interesting. That was the only category of business that was called out, because obviously London is at the heart of everything financial. So it's a really interesting prediction. Thank you.
Exactly. I think London is a really strong centre for FinOps. There's a lot of talent in this space within the UK, and this is an area that I definitely see as just one that is sort of at the beginning of that what do they call the hockey stick kind of curve.
Ooh, if there's any other questions or any comments, there's a few comments in the chat if anyone wants to jump in.
I didn't hear a definition of, and maybe I missed it, but what is cloud native? I think I know what it is. Is there a definition?
There is a full definition of it. I think if you can easily search for it on the internet. I see cloud native as a set of tools and practices around modern infrastructure stacks. The classic definition of this is run services in containers, orchestrate them with Kubernetes, and then organize your services as microservices so that each team can independently make progress without having to depend on each other. I'm not entirely sure what kind of a definition you're looking for. I would say that's probably a more technical definition. I don't know. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? No, well, thank you so much again, Cheryl, for your time today. That was a really interesting talk. And hopefully we can see some more of you next week, where Dr. Ibrahim Bashiri will be talking about opening up radio access networks with commodity hardware. So thanks very much for joining us today. And thanks again, Cheryl, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.